So as it turns out, maybe hanging around my mom did have an impact. In that
I think she did. I think it's safe to say
that she did. I enjoy software cases, and I am fundamentally excited. I mean, the reason we're talking today is because I love seeing where the technology is going. I know we're at an inflection point, both with AI and blockchain, that I don't think we can even fathom where it takes us next, but it is as significant, if not more so, than the internet.
Your resume, my goodness. I was really hoping you could talk to me a little bit about specifically education, because wow. And then obviously, that leading into your background and how you got to where you are today.
So my education. So we're talking tech, and it started at MIT, which was a choice that I guess made sense because of my strong interest in math and science. Came in an unexpected way in this sense, that probably the person who told me to take that leap was a nun, because I went to all girls Catholic school, not what you would expect, right?
No.
And she's like, Leslie, you're good at this, and I think you should apply and see if you can get in here, and so the rest is history, as they say.
Wow.
But taking a few steps back, a little context. So the interest in math and science was driven by my mom. She was a computer programmer back when data processing was just getting started in computer programming. I grew up, she was working weekends like people do in the tech industry, because that was the time when you could get cycles on the machine. And so I knew what a data center was by the time I was 7 or 8, because we had to go in with her to work. Because my dad was he worked for the federal government, but in his spare time, which was anytime he could get his hands on it, he was a musician, jazz drummer. And so weekends he was doing that thing, and we were in the data center with mom. So,
wow.
Yeah. So anyway.
So it's all in the family.
Education. It's a little bit all in the family. So going back to education, so computer science was pretty much a natural, though I resisted it initially, because I didn't want to do exactly what mom did. Right?
You can only fight that for so long until you're like,
you yield.
I'm just like mom and dad.
and her advice panned out, because that has worked out well. But that said, I think it's just always kind of curiosity and wanting to learn. And so the other things on the resume, whether it was going to B school, because it was a chance to move towards doing a broader set of things. I started out at a bank, doing technology at a bank, but so very quickly to understand finance, to really be promoted, getting an MBA would be important. So off to business school. Did consulting for a while, managed technology teams for a little while. Frankly, was looking for something interesting. Our project was being patented. And so I got to see what patent lawyers did, and off to law school.
Oh man, so I can see how it all comes together.
There's a method to the madness in that sense.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so being in the STEM fields for decades now, I mean, you got into it when it truly was a field dominated by
years,
men.
But long ago.
Right. Well, I mean, even now it's pretty dominated by men. So I imagine at that time
it was.
It especially was. I mean, how has that been for you?
So it's interesting. I think because it was so male dominated, and back to seeing my mom's experiences and knowing that it was the guys she worked with that kind of, brought her along and taught her and gave her the opportunities. And it didn't feel like a deficit. Though in retrospect, when I think about it, I mean, MIT today is, I understand entering class is almost 50-50. It was 1 in 10 women when I was there, right? And so...
Well, I'm sorry, you said you were 1 of 10 women there?
1 in 10. Yeah.
1 out of 10 were women there.
1 out of 10 were women. And... So yeah, that creates challenges in any number of ways, I guess, not unlike what you see in Silicon Valley now, which is you're probably missing opportunities or are being, in some sense, not have some of the same access, and you don't realize it. That said.
You think so?
I think there's always that risk. I think that's some of the challenges that people are still fighting for now in Silicon Valley, to make sure that whether it's implicit bias or whether it's just having the comfort level of having other people who kind of, look and act like you, to provide a sense of community. All of those things, I think, help you thrive and be a better at whatever you're doing and trying to strive for. But particularly in your profession, that's important to find mentors, to find sponsors. It's not impossible to do that across gender, but certainly sometimes that helps.
I know a lot of companies and educational institutions are, specifically in STEM fields, are requiring like 50-50 male to female? What do you think about that?
So you said some STEM programs are doing that. I think mandating numbers is hard, right? I think that should be the goal is to have representation and equal representation. And so our society is 50-50. So that would be ideal. But how does that play out in any given set of circumstances or any particular job? That's hard to say, right? Because it depends on the specialties, it depends on people's backgrounds. I think we should have it in mind. I don't know that you can mandate it in quotas, right?
I know that you're also the co-chair of your firm's diversity committee.
Yes.
Tell me about the work that you guys do with that.
Oh God, so much. But I think it's kind of it's exciting. But there are challenges. I think it's probably no secret that the legal field, maybe even worse than engineering.
Oh, you think? Really?
In areas, they're definitely in areas. And when I say areas, big law. The large law firms that service the largest clients. There's still challenges in women, diverse attorneys, staying in those environments long term. I think the numbers, particularly in the entering classes in law schools, in those firms are 50-50 women, say, for example. Over the long term, that doesn't always play out in terms of who maintains a long-term career there and who is promoted. Many complex reasons why that's true, but I think one of the exciting things I get to do is make sure that we're providing all the opportunities we can for our attorneys who, if that's the path they want. And for sure, people, they're smart people, they can do many other things, but if that's the path you want, that there are no roadblocks. And so that for me is as much a passion and a privilege, frankly, to be able to serve that way, as it is just exciting.
Have you seen a difference in your firm's dynamic or even, output or anything like that from the work that your committee's done?
I think I don't know if I use the term output, but I think what we can see is a lot of things. We've been able to recruit in larger numbers, diverse attorneys, and have a greater percentage in the entering classes. I think we've been able to see with that obviously creates a larger body of attorneys who can move forward through the firm. I think a greater focus on making sure that we're looking opportunistically of who we can hire as laterals to increase the body of increase the diversity within the firm. And I think just raising awareness has been one of the biggest benefits of some of the work we do. And so, it's hard you can put some measures around it, and people do, and we're certainly mindful of looking at the metrics. But there's also just the cultural shift that you're interested in and maintaining and constantly evolving and growing. And I think that's the sort of thing that all of our efforts have culminated in. But there's still work to do because, as I pointed out, the legal field still has some challenges. There's still so much that is relationship driven and long historical relationships that people who have not been in those fields as long have some gain to ground. Also some ground to gain, I should say.
Specifically with tech, why do you think there is such a discrepancy between the amount of women and males in the industry? So,
that's a complex one, right? I think there's the general view that sometimes young girls, frankly, are not encouraged to pursue their interest in math and science. I hope that's not still true. And I do know there's so many more programs now to encourage girls to look towards math and science. But I do think at the end of the day, there are some cultural influences that maybe dampen the enthusiasm. On the other hand, I think it's also the way we message things. And in one of the things that you see, like Girls Who Code and organizations like that do, is they show girls, whatever you're interested in, you can build an app for that too. You don't have to build the app that the guys build. If it turns out you're interested in something different, then go for it. Do that too. But that's using technology too, and you should acquire the skills to do that. So I think that those differences are changing. I think that they will change over time because everyone kind of understands now how pervasive tech is. But back to kind of gaining ground from where we were, there's still sort of a backlog, for lack of a better term, in terms of building up that interest among young women so that they move into tech. Because I don't think there's any reason in the world why it shouldn't be representative for women to be in tech.
Do you think that that's going to change at all now that it's so easy to learn these skills kind of outside of formal institutions? I know that I've learned a lot just from really cheap and accessible online courses that you can take at any time. to match any schedule or anything like that. Do you think that that's going to make it easier or different?
That definitely makes it easier. I think that has helped. I think you see, I've been surprised at how many women I know who didn't start out in tech who are like, yeah, I'm taking this coding class. So I'm trying to figure
Right,
this
that's
out.
exactly,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And that probably didn't happen 10 years ago either, right? So I think that is a big difference. Does that still mean we have, 100% adoption among women being interested in tech? Of course not. We're not quite there yet. But
that'd be another problem.
That might be
every
cool.
single woman is jumping in and saying.
Well, because and this is a little conversation we're having. But tech is broad. What does it mean when we say tech? Tech is now pervasive in everything, right? You look at I was just looking at an article on AI and it being characterized as one of the general purpose technologies, much like something like electricity was. Like it's so fundamental to everything we do that ultimately it will touch everyone's life. So to say that you're involved in tech actually will mean
that
will be like, I know how to turn on the lights. Like, right,
social media, fashion, like everything. You're right. Everything incorporates tech. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I saw a quote of yours that I loved. Correct me if I get this wrong, but it was something along the lines of you were saying great lawyering is being part teacher and part advocate. And I love that because I'm definitely going to be leaning on the teacher side as we jump into, the technology because that's your expertise, not mine. And I wanted to ask you, about Fintech, specifically, just kind of start off from the foundation. What exactly is Fintech?
Okay. Well, at its most basic, it's a description or terms that abbreviates financial technology, and that encompasses a wide range of things. It is probably all the ways that technology enhances the way that financial services are delivered and the way finances are managed. And so that's everything from large commercial banking to the mobile app and the retail delivery of financial services to the things that you probably don't even have a sense of what's happening, say cross-border payments and the way money moves around the world or interbank systems. So technology is changing all of that or has already changed all of that, and Fintech touches all those areas.
And can you give us a couple examples of maybe some products or innovations that are coming up or like could be under this umbrella?
Yeah, I think some of the most exciting things are the way that I mentioned AI, the way AI is being used in Fintech. I think it probably in some of its early incarnations where people focused on things like being able to do algorithmic trading, which is a way to use more intelligent machines, more sophisticated algorithms to trade faster, right? And trade in sophisticated ways that the human brain could not do very well.
Is that what they call
That's not high frequency trading.
Okay.
High frequency trading is really a question of throughput, being able to take advantage of latency in the networks and the way the transactions are actually being executed to push more trades through, or to delay when trades go through and play with that latency to gain some advantage. So going back to algorithmic trading, that's kind of maybe some of the earliest notions or early uses of AI for in investment management broadly, but now you see it in kind of consumer-facing ways, right? That you have robo-advisors where instead of talking primarily to a human, you're talking to a human maybe who's being assisted by a machine, or you're yourself using your app to make your investment decisions. Those are the sort of things I think have been there for some time, but they're getting more and more sophisticated and becoming pervasive. And by pervasive, I mean not just a way for you to say, okay, well, I'm interested in getting some investment advice and looking at where my money lies and combining that all into one app. But there's a number of apps out there that do that.
Would like Betterment go under one of these?
Example, yep. Personal Capital,
We're
one
fans.
of those, right? So you bring everything in one place, you've got one view, and it may suggest things you would do, but there's probably a limit at how sophisticated that advice can be, at least that being delivered to your app, until you have to get on the phone and talk to someone, right? But that same sort of technology, take that same idea and put that into large scale investment firms like a Goldman Sachs, who has their own robo advisor, right, Marcus. And while there's a I guess retail is probably not the way to think of Goldman Sachs, but there's an outward facing view of that. There is also the ways that they're using that to basically replace the human trading that's happening, so that they can trade at faster and faster and more sophisticated ways using AI to make the decisions, right? Because that's the essence of AI, is replacing the human cognitive function, being able to take the models that people that we do all the time in our brains, pattern recognition, classifying information, and learning how to make substitutions and extrapolate and draw conclusions. Doing that with a computer is what AI is. And so investment management is a natural place where you can start to think, well, if I can do that with a machine, I can get vast amounts of data about not just the things that you kind of will assume you need to know about trading, like what was the last trading price and what does it look like? What do the prices look like in this industry? But what are all the other world events that sometimes impact trading? The weather, might affect commodities, and the impact on commodities might affect the trading price of a particular company. Like all of those things, if you can, and really great human traders know how to assimilate all that, aggregate all that information and draw conclusions. Letting a machine do that, you just, exponentially increases your ability to do that quickly, the ability to do it economically, and frankly, accurately, right? And so that's something that, that's on the financial services side, some of the more exciting things that I think are happening with fintech. But I think also the delivery to services to individuals, right? On the retail front, probably started with things like chatbots and just having more sophisticated customer service. And letting you
I love those.
Right. That, I mean, if that were all, that'd be great. But it can be more, right? It can be being able to provide kind of risk management and AIs to prevent any sort of, identify fraud very quickly, right? Systems are doing that to control identity theft, right? To be more smart about figuring that out. Certainly to figure out things like money laundering, which maybe doesn't impact individuals, but certainly impacts institutions, and then the prices we have to pay those institutions. There's a long list of things I could go on, as you can see, but it's pretty exciting, I think, and I think we've only scratched the surface.
I mean, so that does bring up a good question. What does this mean for traditional financial institutions like banks? You touched on it briefly. We were saying like this could affect the front end. What does that mean for the back, like kind of what banks do behind the scenes?
I think it's changing all of that. I think it's a question of and maybe characterizing the way you did the front end and the back end, but what's the back end? There are many, many layers, right? And so there's things that certainly have changed in the front end in a very real way, certainly have changed in the back end in terms of how, for example, trading is managed, or how, for example, if you're looking at things like insurance underwriting. So some of the core analysis that any financial institution has to do, they can use AI to enhance. Probably taking a step beyond that is, well, what do we do with the systems that allow any given institutions to speak with each other or to interact with the banks around the world, right? Those are sophisticated payment networks. Those are sophisticated systems for moving money around the world and trading and exchange and figuring out the exchange rates and all that sort of thing. Those systems are changing over time. And one of the things that, and I know my colleague Marta talked to you a lot about blockchain, the intersection of how fast AI enhances those things and when those things start to move over to blockchain, I could not predict, but it's got to happen, right? I think there's definitely a move to take out where we have essentially an intermediary, like a clearinghouse, to move that, to decentralize things and move that away. Does that get rid of financial institutions? Probably not, but it probably changes the nature of what they do, and it changes what they look like. They look more like tech companies than they look like what they look like today, right?
Mm-hmm. Have they already started implementing some of these?
Sure, they have. I think it was probably a few years ago that you had folks like Goldman Sachs who were starting to characterize themselves like tech companies, frankly, to draw engineers in, to get some of the work, to draw engineers in, right? Because it just doesn't sound cool that you went to work for Goldman Sachs if you're a techie, but it does sound cool if it turns out everyone else is there. It's an engineer and a quant. And I would say a few years ago, it was many years ago, for things like algorithmic trading. Sorry,
that's a hard one.
It's a were using engineers, but now it can be in all parts of the way they deliver services that they need engineers. And yeah, that's that. It probably isn't 100% yet, but it's moving fast.
What does this mean? What could this mean, I guess, for financial inclusion?
Yeah. So I think some of the most interesting, or some of the interesting work that's happening in tech around inclusiveness is just being able to better educate consumers about what's happening with their money. I mean, it's one thing to give an app like Betterment to people who already have wealth to manage. It's another thing to provide a tool that allow people to learn how to save, to control their and understand their expenses. And there are great apps out there for that. I can't name one off the top of my head right now, but I've seen them demoed. I know people are doing that sort of work. And then also work to serve the what's loosely referred to, right, as the underbanked or unbanked populations who primarily maybe use the payday kind of stores that allow them to deposit their paycheck and basically get cash. That sort of organization provides a service, but let's just say there's some challenges in that business model.
What are the current challenges in that business model?
I think frankly that it's done at a fee and takes probably in some respects is probably taking advantage of people's lack of understanding about how much they can have control of their own finances. You could imagine being able to, for example, without a bank, deliver to people in a more direct way money, their access to their cash, or putting into an app, a store like a safe. I don't want to promote any particular product, but you think of resources like a PayPal where you basically can have a cash store, right? And that is generally tied to a bank, but it might not have to be tied just to a bank, right? To the extent the technology companies and some are
you could just
looking
have
to
it
get
sit
bank
there.
charters. They're controlling the value and they hold on to that. And so I think and you can imagine being able to transfer payments in that way so that your money goes into something like that, as opposed to having to have another an intermediary who's going to take maybe a larger percentage of your paycheck. And I think that's something. That's changing, but I don't know about here in LA, but I go to New York and you see those stores still exist, right? Where people, show up on a Friday, right?
Yeah,
I expect they're still in LA here too, and that's a large part of the population, and that's the U.S. Think about when you move outside of the U.S. What's happening with people and their access to money and their ability to understand how they can manage their own money. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Yeah.
Can you think of any examples of overseas, maybe in some third world or developing countries, where this could be helpful or maybe already is starting to be implemented?
Yeah, so I think it's M-Pesa as one example, and there are other examples where people figured out very fast that you could actually, in those economies, leapfrog to payment and banking systems on the mobile apps, because there weren't banking institutions. There weren't the financial networks already in place.
Because they weren't, in some of these countries, they don't have
they were very
any
limited
options.
in their reach, right? And they certainly weren't getting out to people in more rural and remote areas, right? And not everybody even in the urban centers that might exist. And so having those sort of apps where everybody has a phone, and it doesn't, it may be only I can deliver them a paycheck and I can give them a few apps to do a handful of things, right? So they can pay certain key bills, or be able to walk to a retail interface and make payments. So it's maybe not pervasive, but it provides people one step closer to having true control over their finances than they would have otherwise. So I think there's already some examples out there, and I think it's only going to grow.
Wow.
As you see people do, what's actually really pretty impressive is I think people also figured out, well, you got to get the internet there with sufficient bandwidth to do that effectively, and that's starting to happen as well.
Right. Do you know what country it was? I thought I saw a country where some staggering number, like 80-90% of its people have jumped on. I think it was Impreza, the app that you just said.
I think it's M-Pesa.
M-Pesa.
Yeah. I believe that's
Yeah,
the right
yeah,
term.
somewhere I think in like East Africa or something like that. There was a
Yeah,
country
that
where there
I
was,
could believe
yeah.
that. I don't know the exact numbers, but I do know they're reaching both in Latin America and in Africa areas that were essentially not banked at all, and being able to at least provide mobile, ways to transmit money and implement payments.
Yeah.
And that's what 90% of what most people do with their money,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How long has this fintech industry been around? Because it's pretty new, right?
So
Or
yes
maybe
and
not.
no. Well, so back to my education. We'll come full circle, which is so what I was doing before I went to law school was developing a smart card system that was being implemented by a spinoff from Sally Mae, of all folks, because what they had was relationship with universities, and you could pretty easily go into a closed system like a university and create, and when I say smart card, chip cards, which we now see pretty ubiquitous today. Back then were not, but they were being used in Europe very widely for telephone cards, and they were starting to be used in systems like universities for vending machines and laundry machines, and you could put some security functions on the chip as well, and let that use for dorm room access. And part of the reason it was schools were driving it is because they get the payments, and they put everyone at the university had their card for for food in the cafeteria. Well, you can use that card for a bunch of other things if it's a chip card as well. And so and that's in fintech.
That was fintech.
That was fintech. There was a bank that was partnering with us to do that. That was fintech. So in some sense, it's been there. And same with the banks using technology to implement investment management. That was always there. It wasn't at the scale it is now. And when I say always there, it's been there for decades. So it's not, by that I mean, it's not new. I think what's new is a couple of things. AI, for sure. The ability to use it at the scale that people can, I think is transforming the way what fintech looks like. I think the ubiquity of the mobile phone, right? So now the ability to have that processing power in the hands of your end user, that changes everything, because you can, besides payments, you can put all kinds of apps there. And then obviously processing power. What was rooms full, I can literally remember rooms full of data centers full of servers can now be done on one machine, right? So those things have changed, but the technology was in financial services for some time.
Kind of back to the banks, what do you think this means for banking jobs?
I think a banking job becomes a different kind of job. I think there is a money management job of some sort, right? That always has to be in place until we figure out some way to move to a world where we don't exchange value. Yeah. I can't even imagine what that would look like when you think about it. So,
or I mean, I think if you're saying that AI is being implemented into financial advising, does that mean potential, danger, but change for the financial advising industry?
Less of the classic trader, you need less of your classic investment advisor. But that doesn't mean you don't need someone, because there's always some need for human beings to supplement what the machine does, right? You have results. You still may want to advise someone. People still want some human contact to be like, yeah, the machine got the right answer, and you can trust it. If it's nothing else, you want that, right? I think then we hope what humans are left to do is think kind of more broadly and more strategically about what we do. So maybe you do get to systems that are more sophisticated in serving the unbanked, instead of all of our resources being focused on solving the same problems over and over again, right? But I don't know. Does that mean in the short term, just like you see with any change in industry, that you don't see some people who are left behind because they don't know how to implement the technology in a way that continues to give them relevance in their job? Sure. I think that it happened in manufacturing. It certainly can happen in banking.
I heard that the financial crisis of 2008 was actually opened the door for fintech to now be thriving like it is now. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, I've heard people say that, and I guess there's some truth in that it put a bunch of folks who had very sophisticated knowledge about the financial markets, looking for something to do. And some pretty well capitalized, but just not having a current home, right? When the Layman's and others folded. And so, yeah, I think that drove people to look at entrepreneurial endeavors, and that with the combination of technology being available, by then you did have, if not just chip cards, but you did have the mobile.
Not just chip cards. Had advanced a little bit.
Yeah, things had advanced beyond that. You did have the banking power on the mobile device. I think that did lead to a lot of development in fintech in ways that might not have happened otherwise. Yeah, or at least not accelerated as quickly as it did.
What has this boom meant for your firm?
Oh, that's for our firm. Well, I don't want to speak. I'm not going to speak broadly for the firm in terms of fintech boom, but I think is it what all of our clients have, or many of our clients are focused on and are using to transform themselves? Sure. And are we advising them in any number of ways that relates to? Yes, absolutely. We service many industries other than financial services, so I don't think.
Or I guess has your technology, like, side of your firm, has it expanded because of this boom, or have you seen more demand for your services in this area?
No, I don't know. It's a question of expanding in that this area as much as it is. It's a competency you have to have now, whereas maybe it was optional. Before that, I think that to understand, to service financial services clients or clients who are making large investments, whether it's private equity or it's in public companies, that to not understand how much technology impacts those areas and impacts not only the way they invest, but what they're investing in. I think that's a core component of what we do. And so that's a competency that we do have and we continue to grow. Whether it's additive in a way that is substantial. Yeah, I think there's so many other ways that technology has been additive in terms of the opportunities for an intellectual property lawyer like me, but also for other lawyers in terms of the types and the breadth of investments and acquisitions and other transactions that we support. Yeah, I think there's no question that Silicon Valley is good for the work we do, and generally the boom in technology is good for what we do.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'd limit that to fintech.
Yeah. Well, putting aside kind of the technology and blockchain and all that for a minute, could you give us a little bit of a breakdown of, because you guys work a lot with technology and patents. Again, putting the technology aside, are you able to kind of give us a little breakdown of just patenting in general, and what that kind of looks like, the processes of that looks like? In other words, like, for example, what makes a product or an innovation eligible for a patent, and I guess what that process looks like?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, the standard in the U.S. to obtain a patent, and it's some form of that is similarly found outside the U.S., is that what you have created is novel, it's new, and non-obvious, meaning it's not an obvious improvement over what was already known in whatever that field is. And so that's something that's tested by patent examiners when you apply for a patent, but certainly part of the job of a lawyer advising someone on patent strategy is to kind of give them some, be able to look around the corner, give them some heads up of whether it appears what you've innovated it indeed is something you uniquely came up with, or something that it turns out others have done or others have done a very minor variation on, and therefore you wouldn't be entitled to a patent.
How long does that process take?
Well, to obtain a patent, I mean, it can take, on average, it's 2 to 3 years to go through the patent office. There are ways to accelerate that. But, particularly because when you're looking at software-based technology, with so much of technology is right now, yeah, that would be a reasonable expectation. And
what would an average cost be?
So that can vary. So and I'm certainly not. So it's not actually the work that our firm does. We advise people in terms of strategy of patent. We don't actually file patent applications for people. So I can't give you a price point, only to say you could be looking at anything in the order of $10,000 to $15,000, depending on the complexity of the application.
I'm wondering specifically for companies, say they're trying to come up with some kind of innovation or something. Just curious. what that would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that's the advice people give most folks. If it's a young company, they're looking to whether they should be patenting in their technology. To sit down and spend some time with a patent attorney, understanding whether it is in fact patentable, and then to move through that process, and basically a lawyer assisting you with the process at the patent office. There's a back and forth that goes on when the patent examiners look at the technology and say, we found something else that looks really close. Don't think what you did was new. So there, yeah. But then you understand better what the invention is, and there may be a way to articulate to them that in fact what we did was new because it's different in these ways. But there's a back and forth in that, and that's what takes time, and that's what takes the 2 to 3 years. And because the job of the patent office is to search far and wide, and make sure that someone else hasn't already done it. The job of your patent lawyer is to help you understand how to articulate your invention in a way so that they understand what you did that was different. And so that can be fairly involved, but that, I think, for many young companies understand that is one way to demonstrate to potential investors that what they've developed is in fact distinct enough to have long-term value. So
I actually don't know. Do you? How does that work for, say, a startup in acquiring investors, but like maybe they don't have a patent yet, but investors want a patent, but you can't really get a patent unless you're like getting going. Can you speak on that at all? I don't know if that's a little outside of.
No, what your question is, how do people deal with that?
Like, I guess, where in the process should someone who's coming up with a new kind of innovation start the patent process?
Oh, I see. Yeah, sure. I think if you think what you've done is highly innovative and you're not aware of others who are doing it, you should think about whether to obtain a patent. Now, there's a cost-benefit analysis, right? There's going to be, first of all, you need to find out if it's patent eligible. There are some things, for example, in software, and financial services in particular was impacted by this, and that if you're merely trying to capture with a patent something, say automating a well-known business method, and you're using basic functions of the computer, you're not making some improvement on the technology itself, that's not patent eligible. And if you think you've done something more than that, you need to figure out how to articulate that in a way that shows you've made a technological improvement.
Figuring out how to use existing technologies differently rather than actually inventing something.
Yeah, well, take a perfect example. I think, a perfect example. Some examples are there's case law that shows that or articulated the fact that, say, the idea of learning how to or being able to use some sort of form of hedging to modify your investment. Well, the idea of hedging. In trading was something that's well known and done for years and years and years and years. The fact that you figured out how to use a computer just to do that well-known method would not be patentable. That's essentially the set of decisions called Alice, the Alice decision and the Bilski decisions that basically said these basic, well-known economic and financial methods, if all you've done is use a general purpose, the well-known functions of a computer to implement that wouldn't be patentable. But move to something like, for example, blockchain, where, what you may be doing is, at the end of the day, related to financial services and may, in fact, enhance something like trading. But what you're doing is fundamentally modifying the way the computer operates, either by being able to leverage the ability to actually to do some mining and generate cryptocurrency, or being able to create the networks that will allow you to communicate and transfer money via the blockchain, or transfer value, we'll say. Whatever you're doing there, you may be able to articulate in a way that shows you've made a fundamental change in the technology, the underlying technology, rather than just use an existing computer function. So taking a step back to your question about, how soon should somebody try to make that evaluation? You probably want to make that evaluation very early on, because I think it sets up some of the protections you're going to put in place. One of the things that the patent office won't let you do is if you've already disclosed widely to the public more than a year before, or you put on sale more than a year before you went to the patent office with your idea, then that basically created what they've considered prior art to your patent. You've disclosed to the world, and it's now known to the world, and the world has a right to use it if you didn't go fast enough to the patent office to gain what ultimately would be exclusive rights by getting the patent. So not everything will be patentable, but to have the conversation and consider it, yeah.
So
you
there's a
probably wanna do
time
that.
limit.
There's a time limit if you've made it publicly known. I mean, to extent, and back to it informs your decisions. If you're keeping it secret in your organization, then you're fine. But once you're starting to, or if you're talking to investors and it's under a non-disclosure agreement, so that's fine. You can do that, and people do that, right? That's how you. It's the only way often people are able to get investors involved, but. You want to be mindful of, well, is my tech team going out there with a white paper, or is my tech team going out there and talking to people to try to or my marketing team, if we have
Clock
a marketing
starting.
team, the clock is ticking. Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Speaking of blockchain, I know that you can file patents in different countries, right?
Sure.
So how does that work when it comes to enforcement? Especially when it comes to, like, I imagine this being really relevant when we're talking about decentralized and democratized applications built on, say, the blockchain technology. So how does that work when you're trying to enforce a patent?
We're going to find out.
I have no idea.
So no, I'm going to give you a more.
You let me know when you find out.
Yeah. So challenging. So okay, kind of several layers there, but. So your patent is obtained in a particular jurisdiction. So you've got a U.S. patent, you've got a patent. There's such a thing as a European patent for the, not all, but a substantial amount of Europe. Or you can get a patent in individual countries, right? So there's a particular jurisdiction where you would have rights to enforce that patent. Something like blockchain that could be highly decentralized may make it difficult for you to first detect where infringement is happening, so that you could try to enforce your patent. May make it difficult for you to identify where the harm is, so that you would, even if you could detect infringement, identify a harm such that you're entitled to damages. So there will be challenges with that. That said, a lot of the use cases that you see right now are essentially private blockchains. They're not really running on the public blockchain, and those private blockchains have an entity that controls them, and that entity sits somewhere and is subject to the jurisdiction of at least one place where you may have a patent.
I see. Because so that makes
right?
it much easier because it's contained.
In that sense,
It
it's
is
contained.
centralized.
It is centralized, right? The public blockchain is more challenging, but then you probably look at, well, what's the use case, right? You're not your suit is not against the blockchain itself. It's against some particular application or some particular modification someone made, and that someone probably sits within the jurisdiction. Finding them could be challenging, sure, depending on what we're talking about.
How does it work? Again, kind of putting technology aside, just speaking patents generally. A patent that was filed and, say, accepted in one jurisdiction, but then is, say, used or infringed upon in another, say, in another country. Does that apply or no?
Maybe, and by this I mean, so the enforceability of the rights is defined by the jurisdiction. So a U.S. patent is only enforceable with respect to an infringement that occurs within the United States. That said, there may be an entity, and this happens all the time, there may be an entity outside the U.S. that is doing some activity that's resulting in infringement here in the U.S. Well, you can sue them here in the U.S. I mean, foreign companies are sued in the U.S. all the time for patent infringement. That certainly could happen. I think, is that answering your question?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm just thinking that maybe this is bringing the technology back into it. I'm thinking if, say, there's some specific, I'm throwing this out of nowhere, someone creates some kind of, I would say flying cars, even though I know there's still kind of flying cars out there. Someone patents a flying car here in the U.S., but then someone else creates one in Europe with the same technology or whatnot.
Okay.
How would
so
that
that's
work?
exactly why people look to get patents in multiple jurisdictions, because that's a great example. I created here in the U.S. I got a U.S. patent only, and that's where my business is. And I figured I didn't need to worry about the rest of the world. But turns out, over in Germany, someone did the exact same flying car. You're out of luck if you don't have rights that are enforceable in Europe in some way, either through a European patent or through a patent. Well, there's kind of different levels. It's what's called a utility model in Germany and patents as well. If you don't have one of those enforceable rights that would apply in Germany, you may be out of luck if the only place that car shows up
Right.
is and the only place they're flying in, the only place that any activity related to that is in Germany, then you may be out of luck.
Do you think patenting hurts or helps innovation?
Well, there's that. It's a good question. I don't think you could ask an IP lawyer.
I
think it's hard for me to tell you that patents don't help innovation. I think, but here's probably the better response. That would be the knee-jerk response.
Well, I can see both sides, actually, to be honest. I really can.
And that's really it. I think there is a barrier to entry that comes along with patenting that may, for some people, be discouraging innovation, and that is unfortunate. But is patenting a way, because it provides exclusive rights, of giving someone a chance to recruit their investment in innovation? Absolutely, and that's the value in it.
I've heard this in regards to drug development. Because it costs so much.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the easy case, right? Because of the long horizon for research. And there are plenty of people say, well, software innovation moves so fast. The investment cycle is not that long. You can recruit your investment pretty quickly, sometimes quicker than you'll get your patent is issued. How on earth can patent? Right? No, it's a fact.
That's so true.
Right? So, I mean, if you put together an app and have it launched within a year's time, you could actually beat
well,
your
the patent's pending for years after.
And my response to that is that's true at one level. I think if you look long term if you're thinking about something where you're trying to build out a market, and even though your initial initial version of whatever it is you have maybe launched before you had a patent, I think it's hard to make a case for any substantial technology platform that doesn't evolve over time, and that you wouldn't want to protect your core innovation as you start to move broader and broader out. So you think about something like any of the technologies used by Google for searching, for Facebook. If someone stopped and said, well, you know what, we got the search engine up, it's good, we don't need a patent, we're fine. And you're right. You had something that had some value the day you launched it. That's true. But it will continue to have value. That value will only increase over time. To be able to protect that investment in the long run, I think, and which is why you see folks like Google and Facebook patenting heavily. I think they patent heavily, right? Because I think that, at that scale, you understand that protecting your investment is important. Is there still some room for saying we over patent in some ways? Sure. I think there's valid arguments for that.
Yeah, because that's very true when it does come to technology and software. I mean, that's of course, this is a simplified statement, but you could essentially just take the code and copy the code, and then you have, say, the Google search engine. You have the Google algorithm.
So different issues. So intellectual property is more than just patents, right? It's copyrights, and so you automatic that software, once it's instantiated, is already protected by copyright. Now you need to register it, and if you intend to enforce that copyright against someone, but so you have some protection whether you decide to pursue a patent or not. It's a question of the scope of it, and if you really want to enforce an infringement case, whether you've taken the steps you need to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's jump into that, because I talked with Marta about this a little bit, but I would love to hear your perspective on why, let's say, blockchain technology and intellectual property are merging.
Well, not just yet, but I think, I think some of the ways that could potentially merge, and one of the ways, in fact, we've assisting some clients, is being able to take, for example, a license agreement for a particular software software module, and record that on the blockchain. That sort of application already exists, right? That sort of platform does exist. You could imagine where you expand that to actually being able to use the blockchain to essentially be a smart contract that executes the license. So rather than merely being a way of recording the license, it's self-executing in some way so that you're implementing on the blockchain. That's protection of IP. That's a little different than saying it's a substitute for the rights that, frankly, the government provides us by having copyright and having trademarks and having patents. Those are different, very different things, and I think ways of managing IP rights, absolutely the blockchain will be useful for. But the two things are not interchangeable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And in order for that to happen, certain softwares and technologies are going to have to be built on top of the blockchain in order to make that happen. Is that right? Or in kind of a broader question being, because of the underlying, blockchain foundation, which, by the way, to the audience members, like I'll just say, with your colleague Marta Belcher, her and I, we had almost an entire episode talking about blockchain. So
Yes.
if anyone wants to dive deeper into that, I highly encourage them to go check out that episode. But for here, since we're diving deep in, I know that everyone's kind of jumping on top of this blockchain technology. They're building, innovations. There's a whole boom happening right now. What does that mean in this conversation of like patenting? What does that mean? Can you patent a innovation built on top of an open source platform?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think that the answer is depends. It depends, as most lawyerly answers are. And so there's a couple of things going on there. So back to, I mentioned before, the difference between the public and the private blockchain. A private blockchain could, because it has basically created some of the core technology needed to define, first of all, what it will define the protocols for how you determine and validate whether it's a valid transaction on your particular blockchain. We would have to have designed it if you made a private blockchain. You will have to design what it means to mine and generate a new and create a new block on that chain. Defining all of those things, that's fundamental technology that for the most part should be patentable, unless of course you're doing it in a way someone's already done before. There are by now multiple such private blockchains, right?
So you can patent your own version of a blockchain.
Certain elements of it, certainly. So the challenge is, and back to your question about the open source. So the public blockchain, couple of things that make it challenging to patent. One is, open source, and so much already has been disclosed about how that fundamentally technology is defined, right? Many of the fundamental protocols, whether it's how you generate a block, how you validate a block, all those fundamental steps that would be necessary to build any use case on top of a blockchain, at least in a version, and the version being for Bitcoin, that use case, Bitcoin is a use case, right, of the blockchain, that has been defined and that's dedicated to the public, right? That's the Nakamoto paper. Those white papers make that all known to the public. And then to the extent that people have created open source based blockchain platforms and dedicated that to the public, you can't now claim that as your own and patent it. So there are challenges with that. That said, every use case, or particularly if you create a private blockchain and you're adding layers to the technology that are unique in your own, could potentially be patentable. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
I know that, wait, is it true that you also, I guess that's another, I was going to say, I heard that you also can't patent blockchain because it's considered a concept. Is there anything to that?
I'm not sure what's meant by that.
Yeah.
It's hard to. I'm not sure how to respond to that. and what's giving me pause is so at the end of the day, to patent something, you have to demonstrate that you have command of the conception and reduce to practice is the standard that we use. Means that you can describe to someone in enough detail how to implement that, such that it shows that you actually had possession of the invention. And so you didn't actually have to implement it in a way that was a prototype even. You've just described it in enough and robust enough detail that it's clear that you had it. So in that sense, it's an idea, it's a concept. It's not necessarily a particular implementation or instantiation. So to say that you couldn't patent blockchain for that, or blockchain use cases or blockchain technology for that reason wouldn't be accurate. You cannot patent the concept of a blockchain. Of course not. First of all, it exists. Secondly,
Yeah.
that doesn't say anything. You've got to get down to what specifically, because wow, it's fairly complex. But if you think about what blockchain is, it is the ability to use a hash and encryption, hashing and encryption of some form of data to first of all create a unique block, and then be able to add something on that's generated using those, we'll say the same, but some form of encryption or hashing that can be used to validate that the block I created
That connects
is
them
using
together.
not just connects them together, but says the basis for which I created that first block is the same basis for which I created the next block, and then I bring those together into a that's the chain, right? The blockchain, and then when you add on to that and you want to add on another, I can only do that if first I understand how they created those first two, and they validate that when I created this new one that it goes on, and that's back to the consistent and being decentralized. That's why you can have those nodes anywhere, because every time you're adding to the chain, everyone is already there. It's like, well, you can't add to this chain unless you can show us, you can prove to us that you've generated the chain according to the method that we've set forth. So going back to the question of, well, you can't patent blockchain because of concept. That fundamental concept, which is already disclosed in Nakamoto's paper, no, of course you can't patent that. But all the different ways you might implement that and all the ways you might enhance technology to do that faster and more securely, oh yes. If you've come up with a novel way of doing it that is not obvious in view of what's already out there, yeah, you could potentially patent.
Now let's say,
people have. I mean, I don't know if I can't recall now if Marta talked about the sheer number of patents there are right now.
so there's a lot already.
There's a lot already.
Do you know how many?
Yeah. It's people. They're mixed measures, but it's easily in the thousands.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Pending or like actually granted?
Granted.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you know how many pending?
I don't.
Probably a lot more than that.
Yeah, a lot more than that. And people will debate whether something should be in and versus out in terms of what you consider a blockchain patent. But yeah,
Let's say whoever Satoshi Nakamoto was public from the beginning. Could they have patented Bitcoin and the blockchain technology?
If they had been public...
Instead of being anonymous this whole time and secretive.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, could they have decided instead of dedicating it to the public the way they did? Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, they should have been able to. Now, whether, depending on which patent office you appeared at and how well you described and explained it, but given the level of detail that's described in those white papers and what we know that technology, yeah, hard to imagine they couldn't have.
How do you think Bitcoin would be different today if that had happened?
Great question. Don't think it would be where it is today as fast. I do think there is, and this is the reason people do open source, right, to get adoption. But that doesn't mean, I think there are people who say you kind of fall on one side or the other. It's either it's open source or it's patent. And it's like, no. Actually, you can do both. I mean, Android's a perfect example. There's a certain level you can dedicate to the public in order to gain adoption, but there's other things that provide very unique services on top of it that you may choose to patent that because they are valuable and unique and your innovation that you have a right to reclaim some value from.
Is this what people call like patent pledges?
Patent pledges are a little different. So patent pledges are kind of, if you have the worldview that even if I get a patent, I won't enforce it, or I want to limit the ways I can enforce it, then that's what patent pledge is about. There's an agreement it may be unilateral agreement, and the way that the Twitter innovation pledge does, which is say that you just make a unilateral statement as to how I will limit enforcing my patents, or you can do it among a group and form some sort of network that makes a pledge or arrangement. A pledge may be an overstatement, but some sort of arrangement with respect to how they may limit their patent rights.
So in the kind of the hypothetical case of Bitcoin, could maybe not an official patent pledge, but essentially what you're saying is could they have patented Bitcoin and blockchain, but still kept it open source for everyone?
So, interesting question. So, yeah. So you
essentially with no limitations.
Yeah, they certainly could have, right? And said, I'm gonna patent it for reasons that, to basically
Just so
hedge
no
my
one,
bets.
maybe so no one else can claim it or
Or
something.
claim it as
I don't
their
know.
own,
Yeah.
right, and then say, but yet I'm never going to enforce those patents. In fact, there are some. I mean, there are open source agreements where that, open source licenses rather, where that is in fact the restriction. I believe it's AGPL. The federal GPL license is an example where you have to make you have to make certain obligations, or you have under certain obligations to either distribute or make available your source code, things that would be, they don't directly speak to patenting, but would be at odds with later deciding I'm going to get a patent, or at least enforce my patents on the technology. So yeah, they might have done that. I suspect.
But he didn't, so it's too late.
Well, so back to our earlier discussion about patenting in all the every jurisdiction. So if we believe what you're told, that if it's in Australia, and even
is that what they say?
Well, you hear some talk, right? I don't know. Nobody knows. There was some
I
guy
heard it
in
was
Britain.
in Santa Monica.
Yeah, well, that's just it. Depending on who you talk to, who knows where, who he or they are. But it could have been, by point, it could have been a jurisdiction where even having a patent there maybe wouldn't have given you rights to worldwide, and wouldn't at the end really limited your ability to control adoption. But that's it. It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I like it.
What has the reaction been from the open source community? Have they generally been in favor of patenting, not in favor?
Ooh, yeah, mostly not.
Yeah.
I think. And it's hard to characterize broadly the open source community as a monolith, right? Because there's right now, and I say that because there are companies who make a large amount of their software available through open source and very dedicated to it, but they also patent, right? They patent other aspects of their technology. So, but by and large, most people who are fully dedicated to the notion of software being available as open source think patents are at odds with that. I don't agree, but I understand it.
What about patent wars? Because of these big technology booms, Marta touched on it a little bit about people trying to jump on it.
It may be, in that sense, history repeats itself. I think we've seen that. I don't know that means we'll always see it, and I say that for this reason. So because people have gotten to a different place of how they navigate patents with each other, and the proliferation of technology means that so many different types of companies have patents, are managing their assets that way, and their solution may not be, or their first approach may not be litigation. Whereas maybe in the past that was very often for someone like me who does litigate IP cases, like, wow, that's a shame because I think these cases are interesting.
Yeah.
That said, I think it's also very interesting and very encouraging to see the very intelligent ways companies have come together, even across industries, and figure out ways. I mean, these are you mentioned the patent pledges, but other forms of defensive, loosely what we call defensive patent licensing, these strategies for figuring out a way to ensure that I can protect my technology from some, competitor next door grabbing it and grabbing all the value from it. But I also, if you're willing to work with me, there's no reason we need to engage in a war and try to tear each other down. There may be a way that this market, and obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but there are antitrust limitations to how much you can do that and how much any one industry can do that. But when you're looking at something like blockchain or something like AI, where there's many industries involved, and it's harder to make an argument for there's an antitrust issue because you're not necessarily controlling any one market. Does it make sense for players to come together across industries and think of smart ways to limit their potential liability with respect to patents? Sure. And so maybe we don't get to wars at quite the scale that we did in the past. That remains to be seen.
Have you seen any real life cases of? I've heard that this maybe is becoming a problem of bigger companies kind of taken advantage of smaller startup companies because when it comes to patents, because they have the means to outlast them in patent litigation?
So always hard for me to see these things from the standpoint of
Of a
patents being
non-lawyer? Oh.
misused. No, because I fundamentally believe in the fact that patents protect value. That said, is it fundamentally true that a small entity will not have the resources to litigate a patent case in the way large? Of course, of course, of course. But there are many things that have been implemented, some with varying degrees of success to try to address that. There are and there have been entities that acquire patents at large scale from small inventors, with the idea of giving them some value for their innovation and taking on the risk of being able to enforce it, being able to recapture all of the value. I think that puts some limits on how much a small entity finds itself in a unfair fight in that sense. I think the other thing that you see is that large companies are often some of the investors in these small entities. And so super, super, super important that those relationships are not adversarial in many cases, right? And so it's hopefully the rare case where that's where you have to end up, where you've got a small entity fighting a very large one. It usually makes more sense to come to a business deal in that case, but not always, and yeah, occasionally you do see that.
Speaking specifically with fintech, if a lot of these larger companies, which in the financial world generally are financial institutions like banks or whatnot, if they are able to get a lot of control over these innovations, what do you think that means for the original intent of like a decentralized decentralized transactional world and trying to lean off the reliance of banks?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of a utopian view, I think.
Is it?
Or some people would say anarchy. Of the view that you would be able to completely remove some form of some central trust. Let's put aside whether it's the banks we know or even a central bank, that you ultimately don't have maybe central trusts, but at least a substantial number of trust agencies that allow you to say, even for Bitcoin, right? I mean, look at the wild fluctuations in value and the ways in which it had to be forked, right? And then the fight now over what is the more valid fork or what's more valuable. That the world wouldn't seek an arbiter or arbiters to help with those kind of disputes is hard to imagine. Now, who that is it a technologist? Is it a bank? Is it a government? I think that could be all up for grabs, but it's hard to imagine there wouldn't be some such, for lack of a better term, oversight. Does that make sense?
Yeah. This is kind of off topic, but I heard this and I thought it was actually really interesting regarding a way that your blockchain could be used with patents. I heard that in theory, if someone merely checking to see if an invention was patented and recording that search on a blockchain, that they could then use that search as proof that they knew about this invention or had an idea for this invention to then be eligible to patent it if it wasn't already patented by another entity. Have you heard of that before?
I haven't heard of that. Interesting. The short answer is maybe, and with everything depends. So there could be a way of using a blockchain to record the fact that you had substantial enough knowledge about whatever that innovation was, and having that recorded somewhere such that you could not, someone else couldn't later come and say that they had the same invention. The difficulty with that, and this maybe gets to our AI discussion, is how do you determine that they're the same, right? The thing that works about, well, there are many things, but one thing that works about the blockchain is it can be agnostic to the content of what's recorded by any particular block. It's the fact that you've recorded it and encrypted it in a way that I can be validated that it's a block that belongs on my blockchain, but it doesn't actually have any intelligence about the contents of it, right? Bitcoin, it turns out its value, but you can use the blockchain for something other than monetary value, right? Mm-hmm. So if your idea is to use the blockchain to validate that I created a particular invention, let's just say even you disclose it at the level of detail that's required in a patent, which is pretty substantial, right? Several pages at least, if not more.
It was a really detailed search.
Pretty detailed, right? So let's just say you take the simplest of those, and there's some simpler versions of I mentioned the German utility model. You can make a less fulsome disclosure, but even if you have some disclosure to capture what your invention is, how do I determine without it's probably a human, but some really sophisticated AI that what someone later came along and said was mine is what you put on the blockchain originally. What the blockchain could do is record the fact of it and fix it in time, and maybe that's valuable. But you can do that. People do that all the time. Nakamoto did it. You just publish a white paper. You can do that in any number of ways. I'm not sure. Maybe I don't understand the concept completely, but I'm not sure how the blockchain
I guess having the validity of it, because if it's in a blockchain, then it's a fact that it happened then.
And sure. And no dispute over, who it was who.
I mean, I guess you're right. Technically, you could email yourself that, and that's also a timestamp.
Yeah. So there's, or like I said, if you're meaning to dedicate it to the public, put it out on the white paper. That's. So there's other ways to do that, but there may be more to that concept. But just the mere kind of assertion of priority of your invention, there's probably easier ways to do it.
That's one. I mean, I guess you could if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about patent trolls? Marta and I also talked about this for a little bit, and it's really interesting to me. It kind of reminded, if I had it correctly, reminded me a little bit of like ambulance chasers a little bit. Is that right?
Gonna use that term.
I won't make you the
people
lawyer.
People don't use the term troll, so it's back to your question.
Oh, they don't.
About
is that like a?
Well, people use it, but I think there are people who think it's pejorative, and maybe properly so for this reason. The notion that a small entity who's attempting to recapture the value from their invention by targeting many large companies should not be by definition a troll. The mere fact that but people see that sometimes the mere fact that you're not practicing your invention makes you a troll. That shouldn't be the standard.
Oh, okay. And is that what they mean by non-practicing entities?
That's non-practicing entities. Some people use those terms interchangeably, right?
I see. Oh, and you're saying they're not necessarily.
Well, they often are, but they don't have to be. Right? And so just to take a little bit out of the maybe the sting or the bite out of the term troll, you can think about a non-practicing entity that is not misusing their patent, is not targeting. For example, sometimes the use of patents to target what I would call loosely downstream users, where very well that the person, to the extent that what you created is a technology and it's being used by a large company, the fact that you're going after their customers because that's how you get to large numbers is, that's sometimes not the most fair tactic. Let's just say that.
Could you actually give a specific example of this?
I give like a mobile app, a mobile banking app. I'll give you one because if there's a case we were in. And so the technology at issue was related to semiconductor chips and the way in which they implemented security on the integrated circuit chip itself and methods for doing that. So that turned into a lawsuit against banks because all of the mobile banking applications are on a smartphone. The smartphone has a chip, and the chip has to be employed in some way in order to execute the secure transactions that a mobile banking application was. Pretty attenuated, if you think about it, right? Why is a patent directed to the security on a particular integrated circuit chip, a processor chip, which sits and it's embedded in a phone that is being used by a mobile banking application by a customer who has no idea and doesn't care that a particular processor is riding on their phone that may actually be called upon to do some of the computations necessary for me to do my, transfer money between my bank accounts, right? That you
And who
might
was
do.
doing the suing? The chip company?
The chip company? Yeah.
And you're defending, I'm assuming. Or who?
we were
I guess
defending,
who
we were
are you
defending the bank
defending?
in that
Oh, the bank.
instance.
Oh, because they were using the chip for their
Right. And so and so that's I say that to say, and probably troll is not the right term, but that's an instance where you could see technology that would be, if that had been someone who, other than a company who was later trying to enforce their patents, but if that had been someone who had never implemented that technology but had gotten a patent, and then was targeting banks in that way, that's often what people refer to as trolls. And that happens in retail. You see large cases where they're going after everyone based on, say, the use of some e-commerce based technology. They're going after every retail store that maybe delivers information on the app. And the basic technology is something that the end users don't much care about. Even the stores are buying the technology from someone else who really is the person who is primarily generating value from the technology. Let's just say that. Does that make sense? I know it's a bit convoluted, which is why discussing trolls gets complicated.
I had thought maybe it wasn't with Marta. I thought it was with Marta, but I thought there were some like entities out there, or even like lawyers or law firms or something where they were specifically targeting. They were like acquiring old patents or something like that.
Sure.
And
So that's a form of a patent troll. So that's different than,
maybe that's more along the lines of what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's different than, say, this just a non-practicing entity. That's basically lawyers who buy a patent in order to assert them and basically shake down people.
Down people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Right. And so that does happen.
that does happen.
Do you think that's growing because of the boom?
I think that's leveling off. I think for a couple of reasons. I mentioned some of the cases that have limited how much you can get patents on a fundamental economic method or fundamental business method if you haven't improved the technology. Well, for a while there were a lot of patents that could issue that way, and those patents right now are nearly impossible to enforce. And so patents like that for a while were generating a lot of cases for these kind of. They could buy up these patents fairly cheaply and enforce them, of course, across a broad number of users. Now it's harder to do that, right? Because you could assert that patent, but it's probably not going to stand up to a challenge of its validity. Because you can challenge the validity of an issued patent on the number, on the fact that what this would be, that it wasn't eligible to be patented in the first place. There are other reasons too, that somebody else did it, that it wasn't novel. So to your question of whether, I think your question was, is that leveling off, or is it more of it? And I think right now, that's probably leveling off, but I don't think it ever goes away, because there is, it is a little, I wouldn't say ambulance chaser. It's probably more akin to to things like products liability suits and all, where there's just a fundamental level of it that, it's based on the cost of litigation, and that people will pay for litigation to go away, right?
Right. Doing kind of fast, small settlements.
Yeah.
Because businesses don't want to go to court,
Yeah,
whatever.
and it's not
they
worth
won't
it
fight
for something that seems like it could go away pretty quickly.
Right. Ay,
Yeah.
Yay. Well, I mean, so what are you in your firm? You guys are obvious, or I should say, not your firm. Your expertise, because you work so much in. Obviously, we've talked about patents, fintech. You've been in tech your whole life, pretty much. Is there any area of this that you're very passionate about, that you love working in more than others? You love working on cases that work within whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think. So as it turns out, maybe hanging around my mom did have an impact in that.
I think she did. I think it's safe to say that she did.
I enjoy software cases, and I am fundamentally excited. I mean, the reason we're talking today is because I love seeing where the technology is going. I know we are at an inflection point, both with AI and blockchain, that I don't think we can even fathom where it takes us next. But it is as significant, if not more so, than the internet. And so. Yeah, that is super exciting to me. Any cases that touch on that. Right now, it's a little early for us to see litigation related to that. Although a little bit with AI, when you think some of the earlier systems, things like natural language processing, there have been a handful of cases of that.
Like what regarding?
Like things that are able to take large sets of data, whether it's like, huge sets of databases of documents or images, and well, not images rather, but large sets of documents, and start to interpret them in some way, right? So that you're able to basically, the machine is doing the reading and identifying patterns and able to classify and aggregate the data, and no matter what form it comes, right? Because that's ultimately being able. You can do it for a couple of things. You can do it for just processing large amounts of data, but also it could start to be used for speech recognition, right? If you can pick up language patterns. So that technology's been around for a little while, and so you are actually starting to see cases related to that. But there's a whole nother level where you've got patents like on machine learning and deep learning, where I don't know yet that we've seen very many cases, but there no doubt will come.
Do you by chance know who Gary Vaynerchuk is?
I don't
He's one of these entrepreneur, bigger than life YouTube personalities. He's great. He's really great. But he does talks all the time about, he's really good at predicting the trends. He was one of the first investors in, I don't want to get him wrong, I think like Twitter, Facebook, like he's really, really good at knowing where things are heading. His big prediction for the upcoming future is speech. And he keeps pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. With what do they call it? Alexa, Echo. He thinks things like that.
Yeah. So so I'm not an investment advisor. I don't make those kind of predictions. Probably would be better off at that than a lawyer. But
if he wants to come on.
But honestly, yeah, I do think that we've only scratched the surface of what the potential of that sort of thing. Because think about it, the way it's used right now, it's in some sense pretty static, right? There's a device in your home, but what if this were some sort of device that, wherever you head, and you talk to it, we've got cameras everywhere. You could be talking to some sort of receptor everywhere and being able to communicate what you wanted to do. I'm a huge Star Trek fan, those kind of things. But there's some truth in like everything on Star Trek is now coming true. Right. It is now coming true, right?
Right. It's true.
So,
like all those old past movies that were talking about the future. It's like it's happening.
The spaceship, and they just spoke what they wanted to do, and I don't know how fast we get there, but if that's the sort of thing he's anticipating, he's saying, come, sure.
He's huge on, because he's more on the business side, more about markets and again, where the tension's going. And he's like speech. That's where he's like, I don't think he cares so much about the technology. He's just like, that's that's what's making it faster. That's what's making it more efficient.
Oh, that's a fair point. So to my point about some of the early cases were in like language processing and speech, that's kind of maybe a lead predictor, because where the technology is moving is more and more sophisticated. For example, neural networks, like ability to simulate the human brain with kind of the node of processing that our human brain does, right? It's just more and more sophisticated ways to do pattern recognition and to process large amounts of data, right? And to make predictions. And isn't that what speech recognition is?
Yeah.
So he may be right. I don't know.
I saw it for the first time in my email the other day, because the email that I do, they just did a big update, and I started writing. This was an email. I've seen this obviously in text, autocomplete suggestions, and they suggested it, but it wasn't just some generic suggestion, like
specific to you.
It was my language that I use a lot in my email.
Exactly.
And I was like, oh my God, I used it. I was like, yeah, that makes it easier, but that's crazy. That was weird.
So that technology.
It's not speech, but yeah.
But no, it's the same thing. The predictive text. That technology has been around a little while, and I can tell you we've actually already been in litigation around that kind of technology.
For what, if I can ask?
It was the assertion of patents against a number of people, but we represented Huawei. But there were Samsung, pretty much anyone with a mobile device maker was being sued based on that technology. Yeah, because when you text, that's what's happening.
Interesting, but is there anything else that you would love to get out there about what you do, about what you love? Technology, law, any of it? I mean, it's so great how all of your worlds have collided into what you do now.
The only thing I would circle back probably where we began, which is talking about diversity in STEM, and I don't think we can pay enough attention to making sure that women and all populations are invested in STEM, understand it, benefit from it, because everything we do is going to be impacted by technology, and to be left behind in that is would be tragic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully your committee continues to keep
Well,
doing stuff.
we do all we can,
Yeah.
and I continue to do all I can. But I think that's probably, if there's a passion, the thing I would continue to do always is to dedicate myself to that.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on and getting even more into the weeds and all this. Again, like I said, Marta was wonderful. We were able to do a really good breakdown of blockchain and what you guys do at Ropes and Gray. So we were able to kind of jump into some more detailed like breakoffs from that, which was really great.
No, this has been a lot of fun. Kind of a survey of the things we do every
No,
day. It's been great.
which is absolutely perfect. We want people to come on, talk about their expertises, and so that was absolutely informative and wonderful. And it's just going to keep going. I mean, it's technology, so it's just going to keep
Well, good
evolving.
of you guys to delve into it. I think not a lot of people are talking enough about it. It impacts all our lives, so we should.
Does. Thank you. We hope to keep doing it. But so thank you so much for coming on and talking to us, Leslie.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.